Hello, welcome back for another episode of Mums on a Mission with your host, Julie Hatch. I am here with a lovely guest today, Amy Williams. That's right, Amy. And Amy Williams is a woman who helps teachers and families learn how to manage stressful situations with children. She's been a trainer and professional coach for over 25 years, with over 25 years of experience in education and development. She also has years of experience as a dance, movement, and expression arts therapist and counselor. And the quote on her website, which I love, says, "You know, when your classroom or living room feels like a hurricane and you feel like you aren't going to make it through the day because what you really want to do is scream and cry or freeze?" Well, that sounds like a lot of mothers that I know for sure, how they feel at some point in their lives as a parent. So I'm welcoming Amy, but Amy also has another area of expertise that she's going to be talking about today about consent. But I will let her talk about that. So Amy, also, I'm sorry, Amy has created her own business called Amy Williams Academy, which you can find online at amywilliamsacademy.com. Welcome, Amy. Glad to have you here.
Hi, thank you, Julie. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor to be able to speak with you and your listeners and to get this message out to as many people as possible. I feel really passionate about this. I want children to know about it. I want families to feel really comfortable having these conversations with children early and often.
Yep.
So thank you for the opportunity. Happy to be here.
So let me just, before we get going too much, because they're going to be saying, well, what? And so the topic is consent. So, and consent, it can be a blurry word. There's a different ways of thinking about it, especially when you're talking about kids and with parents. So let's start with, what does consent mean?
What is consent? Well, get this, Julie. Often we learn what consent is early on. And often what we learn is what we teach our children and our students going forward. I work with educators and I work with families. So I might use student and child interchangeably. Yeah. So it's important to do some thinking and go, what do I know about consent? How was I taught about consent? But if we get to like the full-on definition, I love to ask the question and pose this question to the elementary students that I work with to kind of get a beat on what do they know about it already, right? So when I ask the question, well, what is consent anyway? There's almost always a pause and then a hand goes up and there's a brave student who says, it's to ask if you could do something, question mark. Like, yes, that is true. It's to give consent is to give permission. To ask consent is to ask for permission. So you're looking for an enthusiastic yes or a clear, firm no, right? So you're listening for that and you practice giving that as well. Enthusiastic yes, clear, firm no. That's what you're looking for. And so consent is asking for permission to do something.
Yep, perfect. That's what consent is. I like that. Now, what's kind of interesting is that I think that you say that it starts as early as infancy.
Absolutely.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yes. I just want to underline to your listeners to have this conversation and get ready to have this conversation early and often. And early means infancy, right? So when you're with your young child, your infant, and you're about to change a diaper, right? So you can use a technique called narrating or sportscasting or even forecasting, right? What you were about to do, what you are doing, right? Like, oh, it's time to change your diaper. I'm going to lift you. I'm going to pick you up, right? Even those small moments when we think, oh, I'm just going to pick up my kiddo because they're crying, or I'm just going to pick them up because we got to go, right? You could say, it's time to go. I'm going to pick you up, right? True and brief, doesn't have to be a whole paragraph about what you're going to do, just naming what it is that's about to happen. So there are lots of benefits to this. Children are learning language, they're learning social cues, kind of what happens in the world. So this technique of saying what it is that you are doing or are about to do, it helps children learn about the world, right?
Yeah.
So an infant's body, get this will blow your mind. Their body will learn to prepare themselves to be picked up, right? If they know, oh, my person is about to pick me up,
Yeah.
right? So as a teacher or the important adult in a child's life saying, oh, I'm going to pick you up, and you reach down to, scoop under your infant's body to pick them up, they'll arch their back, they'll prepare their body to be picked up. So
Yep.
they actually are in partnership with us.
Very
Right?
great
Is
point.
that,
Great
yeah,
point. Yeah.
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 So having this conversation early, letting them know I'm going to change your diaper, I'm going to use a wipe. It might be kind of cold, or, oh, I'm going to warm up the wipe. Now it feels warm. I'm going to wipe your bottom. I'm going to, and you're just saying what it is that you're doing. Diaper changing time is such an incredible time to build relationship with your
Yeah.
young child. Yes.
I never
And it's,
thought of that, but you're absolutely right.
well, you're right there. One of you is naked
Yeah.
at some point, right? So there's a vulnerability for sure in that time that you have together. So if as families we can, or the important adult in a child's life, we can slow down and just use that as, relationship building, as consent role modeling, as connection, as smiling, as loving, as connect, in that kind of way to connect with our child, just deepens the relationship going forward.
Yeah. There's a perfect opportunity because I talk about consciously connecting with our kids, and you can do it in so many ways. I never thought about it actually, and telling people about you can do it during diaper change. Of course, you can consciously connect with your child anytime, anywhere. But that's a great example. And like you say, they're open and vulnerable, and they're adorable, and they'll pee in your face if they're a boy. And but it's
Yes,
but it's I can see the benefits of talking them, like you say, narrating or sportscasting about the whole process of changing their diaper.
right,
It's an
right.
opportunity. So this begins in infancy, and then I imagine that you continue to check in with this. Why is it important to do this regularly as the children gets, to toddlerhood and then childhood and older? You must
Right.
have to keep checking in and
Sure.
re-emphasizing this or reinforcing this.
Right. It does several things to do it regularly. It normalizes that you can have conversations about this and that it's not taboo, and you can say all the words that as an adult you might feel weird about saying, because you're saying them more regularly and using the correct names for body parts.
Yeah.
That's really useful, so that it creates an atmosphere where your child can come to you to ask questions about something or other, something that happened at school or on the playground, or something that they're thinking about, or something that they're feeling in their body. There's not this weirdness about it because my mom's okay with me saying vagina, right? It's okay. And they don't freak out. So I can ask that question going forward. We want them to ask us questions all throughout. And when they're teenagers and they have turned to their peers and those relationships become so important, how great is it that we've started early and we've developed that relationship so that our child, all of our children, boys, girls,
Right.
and everyone feels comfortable enough to come to us and say, hey, this happened on the bus, or this happened after soccer practice. Right?
That is huge, because how many times do kids get, and I don't, how many times do our kids have things happen on the playground or the school bus or whatever, and that is just wrong, and they know it's wrong, but they won't go to a parent for whatever reason. I'm not sure whether it's because they get threatened or they're afraid or whatever, but if at least they can start out feeling comfortable saying, that's okay, mom will listen to me and will, or dad will listen to me and help me out. That's big.
Right. And get this, there are more than one or two important adults in the life of a child most of the time, right? Not always, but when I work with children, one of my big questions is, okay, who are your 3 or 5 people, the adults in your life that you trust, that you know will keep you safe, that you feel comfortable talking with about all sorts of things? Who are those people? And they'll raise their hand, my neighbor, my cousin, my brother, my mom, my dad, my stepmom, my grandma. And there is almost always a child or 2 or more in the classroom who can't articulate that yet. So it's a good reminder to say, look around the room. I see one, two, I see three adults right here, right now, that are your important people, right? So when we're talking about going forward, who are the adults that you could go to when things feel weird or uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
Those people right here, right? So as a parent or a family member having this conversation, that's a cool question to ask. Like, who are your people? If you don't feel comfortable talking to me, or I'm not available, or I'm out of town, or whatever, who are the people that you could go to?
Yep.
And that is such an interesting, what the answer is almost always interesting. I ask my daughters this when they were much younger, and who they said kind of surprised me. I was like, oh yeah, Courtney, she is one. That's right.
Yeah.
I had to, of course, call my friend Courtney and go, okay, just
You
so you
are,
know.
you're one. You're one of the chosen
One.
ones.
Yeah.
Okay, so this must also tie in very much with how, and I really am, and I know, nah, it's absolutely for both people. I'm a girl, and I, have been through my own things as a kid, so I speak from a woman's perspective. But so how we were raised must tie into how we help our kids deal with consent, because I know I'm obviously a lot older than you, and I know I'm older than my listeners. I was certainly never nobody ever said anything about consent, and that was a problem. It was not a problem, but it made a difference.
Sure. You know where I learned about consent? In graduate school, deep in my 20s. Like, what? Thanks, Mom. Thanks, Dad.
Yeah.
But they were doing the best that they knew.
Absolutely.
And some things were unspoken in my household. Like, oh, we don't talk about that because Mom acts really weird when we do that. So, oh, well, I can't talk to her, and I'm certainly not going to talk to him. And so what about my sister?
Yeah.
So I could turn to my sisters when I had questions about anatomy, for sure. Thankfully, I had an older sister who was a nurse. And I thought, okay, she's my go-to. I'm going to ask her about this. She still is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Good. Yeah. So you weren't brought up with, so we're starting perhaps a new generation of kids that are becoming aware of the importance of consent.
For sure. And it's never too late. I want your listeners to know that, oh gosh, my kids are teenagers and I've never had this conversation with them. Or my child's 7. Is it too late to start? It didn't start early. It's never too late to start to have the conversation.
Yeah.
And children and our young adults, if there are children who are getting older, will appreciate when you, as their important adult, you might feel awkward about it. So say, I feel kind of awkward about this. I know it's an important thing to talk about, but because it's important, right?
Yeah.
So you can feel free if you want to sit down on the couch and have this conversation. However, that can make, if something's already feeling awkward, that can make it more awkward. But drive time is a great time. Because everybody's looking forward or looking down.
Yep.
Driver's looking forward, right? So you could begin the conversation of, hey, I listened to this podcast and I was curious. So come from a place of curiosity. I'm wondering if you know about or have heard about this word consent. Pause, give some time for processing. Yeah. I learned that it's permission. When you ask permission to do things, like what kind of, and you could go on with more questions. When you find out and talk about what it is in the first place, you can ask questions like, well, what does it sound like? What does giving consent sound like? And you could make it into a lighthearted, it could sound like, yes, sure, of course. Absolutely. And you can get a little silly with it to keep the engagement together. What are all the ways that you could say an enthusiastic yes? Okay. What are the ways that we might say no? How would you say, if you do not give consent, what does that sound like? No way, not now, maybe later. I feel uncomfortable. Ask me tomorrow, or I'm not available, or a firm, clear no. No, thank you. absolutely not. Right?
That's really
So
helpful to give them solid, I'm sorry to interrupt you for just a second, but to give them solid words that they can use. For example, how does this feel to you? That's really helpful. Don't just say, oh, use your words to say no. Give them words that they can use.
right. Because sometimes if something does happen on the playground or class or somewhere, they'll have a script that they could come to, right? I had this conversation with my person, and I could say absolutely not, or I could say no way, or I could say no.
Yeah.
Right? And we've practiced it. You can practice an enthusiastic yes. You can practice a clear, firm no.
Right.
Another piece of that conversation that you can go into, and this could be maybe a second conversation or even a third conversation. You come back to it later. It doesn't have to be like an hour-long conversation because you'll definitely lose the audience, right?
Yeah.
So an interesting question to ask is, okay, we know what consent is, and we know what an enthusiastic yes sounds like, and a firm, clear no, but when do I need to ask for consent? What are the different times and places and circumstances that you might ask, right? Okay, and then again, brainstorm some ways before I give somebody a hug, before I play, we play wolf on the playground, right? I want to ask, would you like to play wolf pack on the playground, or would you like to play ponies, or would you like to come over for a sleepover?
Yeah.
Would you like a hug? Yeah. What are some other times? Yes. What about a kiss? What about putting your arm around somebody? What about sharing? Yes. What about borrowing something? Yes. Right. What about secrets? Right. Now, secrets brings up another little piece that I want to share with you guys. The difference between secrets and surprises, right? So I'd love for folks to consider the difference between secrets and surprises. Secrets can get weird real fast, right? Especially if it's a powerful adult telling a child, this is our secret.
Yeah.
So if you help your child know that secrets are not to be kept from my important adult, whether it be my mom, my dad, my stepmom, my stepdad, my grandma, my auntie, who is the person that is my number one person, right? That's a person that we don't keep secrets from. Now, birthdays come along, holidays come along, parties, surprise parties, right? So let's talk about surprises. So surprise is something that you don't tell somebody about, but you're going to, right?
Yeah.
So your birthday present, Julie, is a surprise. It's not a secret because I'm going to tell you what it is.
Right.
Right.
Very good distinction. Very good distinction. Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. I just had that conversation with a couple of elementary students just last week. They were in the hallway and talking really quietly. And I said, oh, hey, does your teacher know where you are? Which is my first question. And they said, yes. And it just looked guilt. Yeah. Like, okay, what's up? What you doing? What you talking about? Do you need some help? No, she's telling me a secret. I'm like, oh, funny thing about secrets. And then I go into the whole thing about secrets and surprises. Turns out it was a surprise. I was like, oh, okay. But you are going to let them know. Great.
That's beautiful.
Let me know if you need any help.
Yeah.
And I carry on.
And that's exactly right. Secrets and surprises that's a really great distinction.
Yeah, there's a difference.
So we talked about consent starting in infancy, but now from what you had said earlier on, which is really interesting, is that how do we, I think you used the word undermine our kids' ability to give consent. For instance, tackling them and tickling them. And so much of this seems so benign and just so, let's play, blah, blah, blah. But how do we undermine the consent agreement between us and our kids?
Well, that is true. There are many ways that we do it without the intention of getting in the way or teaching our children that consent isn't important, right? So number one is tickling or roughhouse play. That could be so much fun. And it's an important experience for children to have. There's lots of sensory goodness that happens, and relationship building and all of that happens there. However, when we tickle without consent, or we like to scare each other or prank each other, there could be some fun and lightheartedness to it. However, you're letting your child, you're giving some mixed messages. Like, I'm going to tickle you, even though you say no, I'm not going to stop. I'm going to keep hitting you with the pillow because we're having a pillow fight, even though you say stop. But you're smiling, so it must be okay. You're laughing, it must be okay. So you can practice that, directly. Like, I know we love to play, I call it playing wolf or play puppies or pillow fight or whatever. And I noticed that maybe you've said no, or you want to stop, and I didn't notice. Let's practice. So you can actually role play. Okay, we're gonna have a tickle. We're gonna tickle machine right now. Is that okay? And then you wait for your child to have the autonomy to say yes.
Yeah.
Or not right now.
Yeah.
Or no thanks, maybe later. Or no way. Right.
Yeah.
So you can role model that you absolutely listen to that.
Yeah.
Even if you're in the middle of a cuddle fest and they say, stop, 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 and they're laughing, that's you as the adult can go, oh, you said stop. I stopped.
Yeah. It's reflecting back on them also that they may be saying no, but if they're smiling, I mean, how many times is that a mixed message between teenage girls and boys? No, but a smile. And so if the kids can learn that, it's confusing that you're not sending a clear message. And if they can learn how to send a clear message and receive a message and know whether it's clear or not, that's
right.
That's great.
Right. Thank you for bringing that point up, because I want to underline and circle it with a highlighter with arrows and neon, that it's important to look at both sides of the relationship or partnership, or what's happening between two or more people. Is that, yes, you want to be able to say a clear, firm no or an enthusiastic yes. And you want to teach your child to be on the sensitive on the receiving end, listening for an enthusiastic yes or a firm, clear no. And sometimes somebody might say, sure.
Right.
Now, is that yes? And if it's not an enthusiastic yes, it's a no. Let's practice that, right? Yep. So if we're tickling and you say, stop, 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 is that an enthusiastic yes? No. Is it a firm, clear no? No, but it's still a no. It's not very clear, right? So it brings up the opportunity to have the conversation and get clear about that, so that our children can listen for it and be respectful right away when it's not clear, right? Yep. And ask for clarity.
So I can see using this as a mom. Do you yourself go into schools and talk with, sounds like you talk with kids. You talk with those two girls in the high school that had a surprise. Do you work directly, or do you give classes or whatever with kids directly and do this? Because you're obviously made for this, which I'm thinking to another question, but I'll wait until you finish with this one.
Thank you. Yes, I do. I go into classrooms, and I go into our primary classrooms, so children 3 to 6, right? With our toddler classroom, I've done training with our infant toddler teachers, so they're aware and are using the narrating and sportscasting as a practice, right? And that's just in the school that I work in directly. Many of the other schools that I work with, I absolutely teach and coach teachers about this. I also coach and teach adults, families about this. So this topic is something that I get requested to teach and to coach about so often. I can't even always. It's like number one. It's the top number one hit.
Yeah.
But yes, going into classrooms, I teach teachers and families how to have that conversation in a classroom. And I get to go into at my own school, right? With stable groups and COVID and masks and all that. I'm not going to visit classrooms now, but have done that. Guest speaker, Miss Amy, comes in and we talk about consent, right? So I go through those questions that I just shared.
Okay.
And with adults, I highlight more about how did we learn about consent or not, and that we can do it differently or do it the same.
Right.
If it worked for us, right? We can, as an adult, can make a difference, different choice, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to, if you don't mind, I want to go back to a couple of other ways that we teach that consent is not important, because I want your listeners to just do some observation over this next few weeks. Like, oh, do I do that? Or no, I'm good at that. Got it. I got that one, right? But the roughhouse and tickle machine, cuddle fest might be one way. Another way is when we contradict their feelings, right?
Mhm.
If they say, I don't want to go to school. Oh, you'll have fun when you go to school. Or when they're crying, we say, oh, you're fine.
Mhm. Mhm.
Come on, toughen up. All those things that we say, maybe from a place of, we know that, that they're going to be okay, but in that moment, they're not. They're sad or mad.
Yep. It's negating what they're saying. Yep.
Right. And I don't know about you, but I don't like people to tell me that I'm not mad when I'm mad.
Right.
Yes, I am.
Yeah. Yep.
No, you're not. Yes, I am. So contradicting their feelings is another way that we kind of undercut that.
Yep.
Another one is the forced hugs and kisses.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, you haven't seen your Aunt Penny in 2.5 years, right? Go give her a hug and a kiss. And if there's hesitancy, be respectful.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we can speak on their behalf. If they're nervous to say, no, thank you, or I don't want to right now, we, as their important adult, can be that voice for them. That's when we stand up, not stand by, but we stand up to say, oh, it looks like Julie doesn't want to hug right now, maybe later.
Yep.
Right? We're talking about consent in our family, so we're practicing consent, and we're looking for enthusiastic yes and clear firm no. So if there's an opportunity to teach Aunt Penny or Uncle Eddie about that,
yep,
yeah, or come sit in my lap, or oh, come here, and I just want to eat you up, I just want to kiss you, right?
If it's
from the best of
uncomfortable.
intentions, yes.
Yep, I can see that. This is just applicable in every aspect of life, every aspect of a kid's life. And so, you keep bringing up these situations of like, oh yeah. So it's everywhere, and which means many opportunities to exercise and help them learn, understand.
For sure.
The power of their voice, actually, also when they say something, and that's what they mean, and don't try to tell them otherwise.
Exactly. And they're more apt to share with us and be honest with us about what they're feeling, because we get it. We get them, right?
Yeah.
So they know that you're going to get when they're mad or sad or angry or disappointed.
Yeah. It's being in tune with them. Now, do you ever, I just am a little bit wondering if there are parents that say, oh, I don't want to talk about touching with my kid. They're too young. They don't need to know about that. They don't need to know that stuff happens. Do you get parents that say that? At I don't know, 3, 4, 5, they don't need to know about that stuff yet, when in fact they do, but maybe you don't have that. Maybe parents are open to it all the time.
Sure. Most of the time, our families that I've worked with and educators that I've worked with have welcomed this with open arms, because we do talk about, when did you learn that it was okay?
Yeah.
When did you learn about consent? And oftentimes that self-reflection comes, oh, I didn't learn about this until a long time.
Way too late. Way too late.
Right. And, I don't have to go into the mechanics of how babies are made to help a child understand that, wow, that feels uncomfortable, or that feels, I don't like the way that feels. I could say no, right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes when a child is clear and has practiced saying no, then we want them to practice also being comfortable to go to that important adult, whether it be a teacher or a neighbor, and maybe it's outside of the family, that there's a person that they could go to and say, hey, this happened. And then the teacher or the other important adult if they're a teacher, we are all mandatory reporters. And I want all of us in the world to feel like we are mandatory reporters, not just because we have a job and that's in our job description. Right. But we are all protectors of children.
Absolutely. Now, which also brings me to another question. I think that what you're talking about and what you're doing is fantastic. Are there other people in the country that are doing this, or you can't possibly be an island doing this all by yourself? It's so important.
I hope not.
You're right.
Yes, there are plenty of people. The questions that I shared with you, what does it mean to give consent? What does the consent sound like? That actually was inspired by a teacher, and I'm going to look up her name right here. Oh gosh. Liz Kleinrock, and she had a school, I believe it was in Los Angeles. I can send that to you and you can put it in your notes if you'd like.
Great.
But she created a poster to use in her classroom. And I do the same thing when I have the conversation with our elementary students, because they love, like big poster boards and different colors. So, we're going to learn something. So it kind of engages them in a different way.
Yeah.
So that's an inspiration right there. I believe that there's a woman in Seattle. Her name is Amy Lang, and she has a website called Birds and Bees and Kids. So I just want to give that a shout out. If you don't know about Amy Lang, look her up and find her. And she's an advocate for children to be knowledgeable and aware of their bodies, and normalizing talking about sex and normalizing talking about things that are happening in their bodies and questions that they have, helping families know, how do I talk to my child about all sorts of things.
Wow.
So
good.
there are other people. Yeah.
However, you can be reached at amywilliamsacademy.com, right?
Yes, absolutely.
I have one last thing that I want to ask you. Well, maybe a couple more things, but and I was going to ask, and that was pretty obvious, how your dance, movement, and expression arts therapy comes through. You're obviously not an actress, but you're a performer, and so that must really come into play with work, certainly with talking with kids.
Sure. It makes role play really easy and fun.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's great.
Right.
That's really cool. Let me just see if there's anything else. So if you could just say out, you've already said them before, and this is sort of the last thing, is what are some phrases that parents can use to teach their kids, either, and for one thing, enthusiastic yes, I understood that, and something no, an absolute no or something. But anyways.
A firm, clear no.
Okay. So what are some of the phrases that parents can jot down maybe and say, oh, I'm going to teach my kid, or not teach, but tell them this is an effective means of communication.
Yeah, and practice it. I mean, your child I've had 4-year-olds be so into the role play of this. It's precious, and they get to actually practice it. Then that's what I want your listeners to do, is to commit to practicing, even if it feels uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
So what words that you can look for and say that mean an enthusiastic yes can be yes, sure enough, of course, absolutely, I'll allow that. Right? So you and your child will come up with kind of what is the language in your household, right?
Yeah.
And you can, be silly and add an accent in there. Yes, so that kind of right. And then on the other side, what does not know sound like? I don't feel like that right now. I don't like it. That feels uncomfortable. Or straight up, no.
Yeah.
No, thank you. Not that thank you is required for a firm, clear no. All you have to say is no, and that's it, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes the politeness is not a requirement. Right? Let your child know that sometimes you can say
they can skip,
no.
They can skip the manners.
Yes. Yes, please. Yeah. I don't want that. Maybe later. Nah, I'm good right now. Yeah. Right. So those are some ways.
Great. Good stuff. Amy, this has been really enlightening for me. I'm as I'm doing this podcast, I'm learning so much from people because my kids are grown and I miss out on a lot of stuff with my kids. Although I was pretty upfront. I had boys, and so I talked a little bit about consent. Mostly when a girl says no, she means no, and blah blah blah.
Mhm.
But anyways, this is so wonderful, getting them from early on and throughout their whole childhood and into adolescence is just really important. So
Sure. Well, I'm happy to be a resource to your listeners.
yeah,
You know how to reach me. I do one-on-one coaching with families. I
okay,
can give me a call. I can help talk you through it if you're nervous about having this conversation with your child. Just reach out. I got you.
wonderful. And reach out to amywilliamsacademy.com, right? Is that the
That's
best way for
me.
them to find you?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Is there anything else that you want to add before we sign off?
Yes, I want to add a little resource to your listeners. I've written a story and I call them Sosimo stories, a social emotional story. Get it? Sosimo? Clever, right?
Very good.
But it's about consent. So I'd love to, if your listeners are interested in that, just reach out to me and we'll talk about if you want a hard copy or a PDF of what I've
Okay.
created that you could either print off or use the printed book to have the conversation with your child, or to
Wonderful.
gift it to your child's classroom, um, and how
Ah,
to have that conversation.
very good. So Simo, but they need to contact you for that.
Right, 'cause
That's
I
a
got
great resource. Very good. All right. Well, Amy, thank you so much. And this has been really enlightening. I'm sure it's been really helpful to
so glad to be here.
parents out there and for all the kids, all of our future upcoming generations. They have you to thank for their safety, really.
Well, thank you. I appreciate
All right. Well, thank you
that.
very much. And thank you, everybody, for listening. And I'll be back next week with another episode of Mums on a Mission with Julie Hatch.